Harrison Ford, you reveal in your book, after 40 years, is that right?
40 years I thought I'd wait.
Okay, so you reveal that you were having an affair with Harrison Ford.
There are men who chase fame, and then there are men who fame chases down and changes completely. Harrison Ford belongs to the second kind. For more than 5 decades, he kept his mouth shut about the things that mattered most, not the movies, not the awards, not the franchises worth billions, but the marriages, the heartbreaks, and the private cost of becoming one of the most recognized faces on the planet. Now, at 83, something has shifted. The man who built his career on saying as little as possible about himself has started letting pieces of the truth come through. And what those pieces reveal is a story far more human, far more complicated, and far more honest than anything Hollywood ever scripted for him. To understand who Harrison Ford is today, you have to go back to a version of him that almost nobody remembers, a young man in Los Angeles during the early 1960s who had no particular reason to believe his life would amount to anything extraordinary. He was not the product of an acting dynasty. He did not grow up surrounded by industry connections or creative privilege. He was, by most accounts, an ordinary young man trying to figure out what he was supposed to do with his life, and for a long time, acting seemed like little more than a side interest that refused to pay the bills consistently enough to be called a career. Ford was born in Chicago in 1942, and by the time he arrived in Los Angeles, his ambitions were modest and his resources were limited. He took small roles where he could find them, sitting in the background of television productions, delivering a line or two in films that nobody particularly remembered, and waiting for something to break his way. That break, as it turned out, was a long time coming. In the meantime, he learned carpentry, not as a hobby, but as a genuine trade that kept him financially stable during years when acting work was scarce. He was good at it. He built cabinets, worked on renovations, and developed a practical, grounded relationship with honest labor that would go on to define something essential about his personality, even after fame arrived. What is easy to overlook when discussing Harrison Ford's early life is just how genuinely uncertain everything was. He was not a man biding his time in comfortable obscurity, waiting for his inevitable moment. He was a man who had real reasons to doubt whether that moment would ever come. The acting roles he did land were forgettable. A contract with Columbia Pictures came and went without producing anything of lasting significance. His appearance in George Lucas's American Graffiti in 1973 gave him a brief flicker of visibility, but not the kind that changes a person's trajectory overnight. He remained, for years, a peripheral figure in an industry that had no particular use for him. It was during this period of professional uncertainty that Harrison Ford married Mary Marquardt in 1964. This is a chapter of his life that has received far less attention than almost anything else about him, and perhaps that is appropriate, because it was never a chapter defined by spectacle. Mary Marquardt was not a public figure. She was not part of the entertainment industry in any significant way. Their relationship formed in the years before fame entered the picture, before any of the external pressures that would later reshape Ford's life had any relevance at all. By every account, it was a genuine partnership built on ordinary life rather than Hollywood mythology. Together, they built a household. Their first son, Benjamin, was born in 1966. Their second son, Willard, followed in 1969. Ford continued working with his hands during the day and pursuing acting roles whenever they materialized. The domestic rhythm of their life together was unglamorous in the best possible sense of the word, grounded, practical, and built around real responsibilities rather than professional ambitions. Ford has never spoken at length about this period of his marriage, and that restraint itself tells a certain kind of story. He is not a man who performs emotion for public consumption, and whatever the texture of his relationship with Marquardt was during those early years, he has kept it largely to himself. What changed everything, of course, was Star Wars. But the change was not instantaneous, and it was not simple. When George Lucas was casting the film in the mid-1970s, Ford was not technically auditioning. He had come in to help other actors run lines, a behind-the-scenes role that required no personal investment in the outcome. But something happened in those sessions that nobody in the room had quite anticipated. Ford's natural delivery, his instinct for understatement, his ability to make sarcasm feel warm rather than cold, all of it began to reshape the character of Han Solo in real time. Lucas noticed. And eventually, Ford found himself cast in a film that, at the time, nobody was particularly confident would succeed. The story of Star Wars and its extraordinary success has been told so many times that it has become almost mythological. What gets discussed less often is what that success did to the private life of a man who had spent the better part of a decade building something quiet and real with his family in Los Angeles. Fame at that scale does not arrive gently. It does not knock politely and wait to be invited in. It arrives all at once, it rewrites the conditions of daily existence, and it leaves very little room for the life that existed before it. When Star Wars opened in May 1977, Harrison Ford's life changed in a matter of weeks. The film's commercial performance was unlike anything the industry had seen in years: lines around city blocks, audiences returning multiple times, box office numbers that kept climbing past every prediction. Ford was not positioned as the film's central star in the marketing, but audiences responded to Han Solo with an intense ity that made that distinction irrelevant. He became famous, genuinely famous, in the kind of way that cannot be managed or controlled or gradually adjusted to. It simply happened, and then everything was different. His marriage to Mary Marquardt did not survive the transformation. The couple separated and eventually divorced in 1979, ending a 15-year partnership that had begun before either of them could have imagined any of this was coming. Ford has never publicly identified a single cause for the breakdown. He is, by nature, a private person who resists dramatic narratives about his own life, and that resistance applies to painful chapters as much as it does to triumphant ones. What he has acknowledged, in the careful, minimal way that is characteristic of him, is that the period following Star Wars involved enormous upheaval across every dimension of his existence. The professional and the personal were not separate. They were deeply entangled, and the acceleration of one put enormous strain on the other. No honest account of this period in Harrison Ford's life can avoid mentioning Carrie Fisher, and no honest account should try to. During the production of Star Wars in 1976, filming at Elstree Studios in England and on location in Tunisia, Ford and Fisher, who was 19 at the time and newly cast as Princess Leia, developed a personal relationship that neither of them spoke about publicly for decades. Ford was 33 and married. Fisher was 19 and navigating the particular disorientation of sudden professional pressure combined with emotional isolation and an unfamiliar environment. The relationship, by all subsequent accounts, was brief. It lasted approximately the duration of filming, which was roughly 3 months, and it ended when production concluded and the cast returned to their separate lives. For nearly 4 decades, it existed primarily as a rumor within the mythology of Hollywood productions, unconfirmed and largely undiscussed by either of the people involved. That changed in 2016 when Carrie Fisher published her memoir, in which she drew on diary entries written during filming to reconstruct her emotional experience of that period with remarkable candor and self-awareness. Fisher's account was not sensational in its framing. She did not write about the relationship with bitterness or accusation. Instead, she approached it the way a thoughtful person approaches a memory that has aged significantly, with perspective, with some amusement, and with an honest acknowledgement of how differently she understood the experience from the distance of nearly 40 years. She described the intensity of her feelings at 19, the strangeness of navigating those feelings in the context of an enormous professional undertaking, and the way that brief experiences in high-pressure environments can leave impressions that outlast their actual duration by decades. Ford's response to the memoir was characteristically understated. He did not deny Fisher's account. He did not expand upon it. When asked in interviews whether he had read the book, he said simply that he had not. When pressed further, he described the situation as strange and declined to say more. That was essentially the full extent of his public commentary on the subject, and after Fisher's death in December 2016, he issued a brief, warm statement describing her as brilliant and fearless, focused entirely on her character rather than on their shared history. It was, in its way, a respectful conclusion to a complicated chapter. What Ford has never done is frame the Fisher relationship as the explanation for the end of his first marriage. The timeline shows overlap rather than direct causation, and Ford himself has resisted any reading that reduces that.